Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and today I'm going to recap my 2023 reading again. So I previously did kind of a 2023 wrap up with my December wrap up, and it was kind of a mess. I was just sort of clicking around in my spreadsheet, spouting off random stats. And if you watched it, I'm proud of you because it was painful to watch. But then after I did that, I saw Jess on Stalking Kafka do, it's not a tag, but she had seen Gabby at Gabby Reads do a recap, and then she followed the format of that recap, and it was a really good form. So I'm stealing it and I'm treating it like it's a tag, but it's not really a tag. It's just, I'm just stealing from other people. But I thought it was a really good framework to wrap up 2023. So we're going to wrap up 2023 again. And see how it goes. So there's a bunch of prompts. I didn't even count how many prompts there were. Doesn't matter. We're going to go through all of them. So the first question is, how many books did you read and did you meet your goal? So my goal was set at 144 and I read 196. So yes, I surpassed my goal. As I have said in other videos, my reading goal is not like aspirational. I don't set a goal and try to reach that mark. I am trying to find the happy point to meet my goal at some point in December. I think I met my goal in October this year. So I have upped it a little bit for 2024, but it's not because I'm trying to read more. I'm just trying to find that number, that sort of pace that I have. But 196, I think, is the most I've ever read. To put that a little bit in context though, I read mammoths, I read novellas, I read very propulsive books, I read slow burn books. So different books take different amounts of time. So what I'm saying is don't, when I say 196 books, don't compare yourself. Don't try to use that to, it's just a number. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Okay, next prompt. My most read genre was mystery, which is not a surprise. And 24.5% of the books that I read in 2023 were mystery. And this was followed by historical fiction at 17.9%. And that is on par for me. That's what I would expect because those are my two favorite genres. So the longest and shortest books that I read. So the longest book I've read, I do have a pile of some of the books I'm going to talk about. We'll see if I remember to get them all. The longest book I read was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I did this as a slow and steady. I did not actually read this particular copy of it. This is a copy I found at my library bookstore for like $3. I read it on my Kobo. This would just be painful to hold up and read. And that's why I read big books on my Kobo. So I don't actually know how big they are when I read them. But this is the biggest book that I read. Now, the shortest book that I read is an Amazon single. It's a short story. It's called Treasure, and it was by Oyinkan Braithwaite, who wrote My Sister the Serial Killer. I think I slaughtered the title of that book for some reason in a previous video, but I do know what it is. I've read it. I really enjoyed that. It is an Amazon single. You can get it for your Kindle or you can get it on Audible. But it's kind of a fun little story. And that was 31 pages, according to what Goodreads told me. So my highest and lowest rated books. I've talked about this a lot, but just in case you didn't hear it, I'm stingy with 5-star books. Very, very stingy. I only give 5 stars to books that are going to be all-time favorites. Generally, my highest rating is an A+, which converts to a 4.5 star. So when I give a book a 5-star, an actual 5-star, not what Goodreads says is a 5-star, an actual 5-star, that means that's an amazing book that's in the Hall of Fame in my reading life. So I have 5 of them this year, which is not very many. The first one is, and I'm going to be rereading this one very soon because I'm going to discuss it with Sarah at Roadworthy. But that is The Beadworkers by Beth Piatote, or Piatote. I don't know. Doing the best I can. She is a Nez Perce author. As a member of Nez Perce tribe, she most likely came from Idaho or Eastern Oregon, maybe Eastern Washington, I'm not sure. She currently lives in the Bay Area. But all of these stories take place, at least in part, in Oregon. Most of them in Portland, one of them in my hometown of Salem. So that was really fun. But beyond just the local connection, these are just beautifully written stories about friendships and relationships. And the last entry in this collection is a retelling of the play Antigone, called Antigone, which is a modern retelling, native retelling about repatriation of bodies. It was really interesting. Since reading that, I have seen Antigone, so I want to read that part again, especially to kind of see how it hits me differently now that Antigone, the original work, is so fresh in my mind. Okay, I don't think I'm going to be reaching that one again. We'll see. Okay, so that was 5-star book number 1. 5-star book number 2. This is in the order that I read them, by the way. 5-star book number 2 is not here. I do own it, but I'm not going to go ready to get it right now. Sorry. But it is Mink River by Brian Doyle. This is another Oregon book. My light is dying. Sorry. Light's weird. It's another Oregon book. Brian Doyle was an Oregon writer. He has since passed, which very sadly, but this is set on the Oregon coast. And it's about a town, community on the Oregon coast, set at a very specific time. He never names the time, but I just know that it's probably late 70s, early 80s by things that are in the story, the decline of the timber industry and the tourism, the widespread tourism on the Oregon coast has not really picked up. It used to be that, you know, to go to the Oregon coast, you went to like Seaside or Newport. There were like a couple towns that you would go to. Now when it's all, I mean, every little town has at least something a little bit touristy in it. And this was clearly written before that. I mean, not written, set before that. So I love this book. It has magical realism in it. Did I mention that? Loved this book. But both Mink River and The Beadworkers are both very personal 5 stars to me. So I would not give them to someone saying this is going to be a 5-star book. I can say this was a 5-star book for me because it hit me in a certain place. Hold on to there. I'm going to turn this off completely because it's dying. Okay. The next one is The Postcard by Anne Berest. This is a book in translation. It is translated from the French, and it is a novel in the very, it's just barely a novel. Let's just put it that way. The reason it's barely a novel is that it's a completely true story. The only difference is, and this is according to the author, is that there are some characters' names. They were real people. She changed their names because she didn't want their ancestors, their descendants, that's the word I'm looking for, their grandchildren, whatever, to be ostracized for things that happen in this book. But it is a story of, there's a family, I think around 2000-ish, in France during the holidays. They get a postcard. The postcard is addressed to the mother's mother, so the author's grandmother, who's passed at this point, and I think she's recently passed. And on this postcard, there's just 4 names, and the names are the grandmother's mother, father, sister, and brother, all 4 of whom died at Auschwitz. And that's weird. And this is all true. All of this happened. So we fast forward a few years. The author is pregnant, and her doctor puts her on bed rest. So she decides to go stay with her parents while she's on bed rest, so they can take care of her. And while she's there, she starts talking to her mother about this postcard. And from there, they kind of decide to figure out who sent this postcard and why. You get the story of the relatives who died at Auschwitz. It is beautifully written, but sadly very predictable. That's not a strike against this book. It is. I mean, unfortunately, that's an all too common story. The story, however, of the grandmother is very unusual and very interesting. And the way it is handled in this book is so gorgeous. This is what I would consider like a true 5-star book. This is one I would give to someone and say, I think you will love this book. This might be a 5-star book for you. Loved it. The next one, 5-star book number 4, is The River We Remember by William Kent Krueger. I'm a huge William Kent Krueger fan. All 3 of his standalones, this is his 3rd standalone, have gotten a 5-star for me. This is the most 5-starry of them. Like the other 2, this is a literary historical mystery. So like historical mystery, this is like right up my alley, right? It deals a lot with sort of the repercussions of war, strife in community, very interesting characters. I thought the mystery was incredibly well done. Love this book. Love. And William Kent Krueger is a pretty accessible author. Like I would feel comfortable handing a William Kent Krueger book to just about anybody. and having it be a successful book for them. Maybe not 5-star because everyone's different, but I think that it would be successful for them. So, and then finally, my last 5-star, which is my reminder to never do your top books of the year before January 1st of the next year, is A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. Finished this book 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve, or on New Year's Eve, which is about, I think, 2 days after I did my best books of the year. So, yeah. This is written by an Indigenous author. She is Dakota, and it's about three generations of women. They all have dolls. There's issues. The dolls talk. I don't want to get too far into that because it sounds like a horror novel. But it's just a really, I mean, you have, the dolls are sort of a manifestation of trauma. So that's really well done. And it's hard to read because it is, I mean, the things that these women went through were really hard. But there's also an element, and this is the part that really kind of pushed it from like being A+ to 5-star for me, an element of recognizing that there's generational trauma, but then that's not a sentence. That's not, you are not doomed to generational trauma. You can still, you know, it's still going to be a part of your life, but you can still live a happy life from it. It's within your power. And sometimes, you know, when you are the brunt of someone else's trauma, you don't see them clearly. And so I love this book. This was a great book. So those were my 5-star books. I had my lowest rated book. I gave one book 1 star this year, which I almost never give 1 stars because those would be DNFs. And I should have DNF'd this book. Should have DNF'd. And the reason I didn't is because a lot of people I know whose opinions usually match mine pretty well really enjoyed this book. So I kept waiting for it to start to work for me, and it never got there. And that was The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This was just a little too, I don't know, too sensationalistly wacko for me. I don't know. I thought it was just crazy in not a good way. Like, it was unhinged. That's how I felt about this book. Now, I'm in the minority. Didn't work for me. I really did not like this book, but again, a lot of people did. But there you go. That was my lowest rated book. Okay. So my favorite books published in 2023. These are the 2 books among my favorite books that were published originally in 2023. River We Remember and A Council of Dolls. So these 2 are my 2 favorite books published in 2023. The other 3 books, The Postcard, I believe, was published in English in 2023, but it was published earlier in French. And then the Beadworkers and Mink River were both published previously, or before this year. So these are my 2 favorite books published in 2023. Now, my favorite debut book of 2023. I really had to think about this one because there were a lot of runners up for it. And I will say there's a couple questions here where I probably had a handful of favorite debuts, and I kind of shuffled them around so they're mentioned in different categories. But this was definitely one of my favorites, and that is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin. Very, very sad book. I'm putting it here. I'm not putting it in a later question because I'm trying to spread there's another question this would go to, and I'm trying to spread things around. But this was longlisted for the Women's Prize. Should have been shortlisted. I don't want to say should have won because I haven't read Demon Copperhead yet. Yeah. But this was very heartbreaking. It's about a teenage girl and the 2 oldest of her younger siblings. So she's two brothers, and they are the oldest. She has other siblings who are younger too. They're in Vietnam, and they have a plan that they're going to go to the United States. They have an uncle or someone who lives in the United States. And the plan is that this girl, who's the oldest, and the 2 oldest of her younger siblings are going to go ahead. And then the parents will come with the younger siblings. And they're going to meet in Hong Kong and then continue the journey together after that. The main character and her siblings, her 2 oldest siblings, they get to Hong Kong, but then the rest of her family never shows up. And a decision, it happens that they don't end up in the United States. They end up in Thatcher's England, so they have to deal with that. I thought that was really interesting because I never thought of the Vietnamese refugees in Thatcher's England. In England, I only think of them in the United States, which I know is very US-centric of me, but there you go. Such a lovely book. So sad. Loved this book. my favorite book not published this year. I went with Mink River by Brian Doyle because Mink River is my all-time favorite book now. My best book of the year, my favorite book of the year are two different books, but my favorite book of the year and my favorite book of all time is Mink River by Brian Doyle. Okay, the book that lived up to the hype. So I had to think about this one too, because I tend to either read books right when they come out before the hype really gets going, or I wait until the hype is over. So I'm usually not reading books in the really hypey part of their publication life. But the one that I can think of, and I'm putting this, I think this one won the category because it was a surprise for me that I liked it, was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This did win the Pulitzer a couple years ago. I had previously read Underground Railroad, and that was a book that didn't work for me for reasons. It wasn't a good fit for me. So I did not go into this one. I went into this one thinking, well, I think Colson Whitehead is just not an author for me. But I loved this book. This book really did work for me. It's a hard book to read. The subject matter is hard to read. It is wonderfully written. The Underground Railroad is a very experimental book, which is great. I mean, you have to have experimental books for fiction to grow. But that doesn't mean it always works for you. And I think the experimental nature of the Underground Railroad is what didn't work for me. And this is more mainstream. I should say there's nothing really experimental about this, but it kept my pages. I love this book. This was a great book. So The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Okay, a book that did not live up to the hype. The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. Enough said. Oh, I have my list here. Okay. The book that felt like the biggest accomplishment. Villette by Charlotte Bronte. So I read this in college. I don't remember reading it. I mean, I remember the act of reading it, but I don't remember the content from when I read it in college. And then Remember December came along, and one of the prompts in Remember December is to read a book you don't remember. So I read this one, and I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't that I didn't remember it, it's that I blocked it out. Do not like this book. Jane Eyre is pretty much a perfect book for me. I love Jane Eyre. But I am starting to believe, and I'm not gonna commit to this belief, but right now I am starting to believe that it's a fluke. And that maybe, because this is it's a staircase. It's not a step down, it's a staircase down from Jane Eyre. And there are themes, and there are sort of devices that happen in both books, and they're done not nearly as well in this book. I read it. I can say I read it. I can tell you why I didn't like it now, which was I thought it was a really unfocused book. I thought it was a little unhinged at times. And I didn't know this going in, but Charlotte Bronte is someone who worked out her issues in her writing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But she had a lot of issues. And a lot of those are really apparent here. They aren't as apparent in Jane Eyre. So, and it's, on one hand, it's not fair to compare this book to Jane Eyre. But on the other hand, of course, I'm going to compare it to Jane Eyre. I do think this is a necessary book to read if you want to understand Charlotte Bronte, because I think this is a much clearer view of Charlotte Bronte. And it's not a book to read if you just love Jane Eyre and you want to read more like that. But I got through it. This was a travail. That's what I'm trying to say. My favorite character. I don't have this book, but it was Clytemnestra from Clytemnestra by Cassandra Casati. So this was my first dip into the pool of Greek mythology retellings. And I really enjoyed it. I thought this was like an amazingly good book of Clytemnestra. I have since gone on, I have read 1,000 Ships. I read that at the beginning of this year. I know. It's still the beginning of this year. I've already read it. To see that character pop up again, because in the book Clytemnestra, you get a very different view than what mythology tells us of Clytemnestra. And it makes a lot of sense. It's not like some really 180. It's just look at a different lens and you see a totally different picture. And I just thought it was so well written and so engaging. And when I see Clytemnestra, or when I hear about Clytemnestra from other forms, other stories, other retellings, whatever, it's always really interesting to see the differences. So I'm going to say Clytemnestra. Okay, my least favorite character. This is a little bit of a cheat, but my least favorite character is June Hayward / Juniper Song from Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And the reason I say it's a cheat is it's very clearly intended for her to be as unlikable as possible. She drove me crazy, and she's supposed to drive you crazy. There you go. It's a thing that's supposed to happen. Now, if you've watched my videos, you know Yellowface was not a particularly successful book for me. The reason it was not was because I have a pet peeve. And that pet peeve is when the plot is pushed forward by characters continually making the clearly wrong decision, and clearly to them wrong decision, which is what happened repeatedly in this book. But it also made June / Juniper even more unlikable. So it's a success that this was an unlikable character, but yeah, I really didn't like her. I will also say, even though Yellowface did not work for me as a book, I have actually recommended that book to a number of people. So me saying that I gave it a C is like, so I gave it a C, but still read it. You know, it's a very personal thing that didn't work for me. Okay, so the next question is the most shocking book or moment. So I'm going to be really vague here because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's from my best friend's Exorcism, which I read this year as my first Riley Sager. No, not Riley Sager, Grady Hendrix. I always get those two mixed up. And I hear that Riley Sager does not live up to Grady Hendrix, so I feel really bad about that. But my best friend's Exorcism. It's a scene that's the result of a drink. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But, oh man. And it was like, oh, we're going there. There are more kind of shock value things that happen in that book, but that's the one that shook me, where I was like, oh boy, we're going there. So that particular scene. The next question is your favorite couple / one true pairing. Okay. I'm not someone who really goes for that sort of thing, so I was just going to skip this question, but then it popped into my mind. This is not a romantic pairing. I actually find the non-romantic pairings even more interesting than the romantic pairings, because the romantic pairings, they are what they are. But the non-romantic pairings, they're much more complex. And mine was Daniel Hawthorne and Anthony Horowitz from the Hawthorne and Horowitz series, of which I've read the first book. So I read The Word is Murder, I think is the first one, which I read and really enjoyed. I listened to it. That is such the interplay between, I mean, Anthony Horowitz is a real person, but Daniel Hawthorne isn't. But, you know, it's fiction is bent there. We're in a shady ground, but the interplay between these two characters is fantastic. And you like one, don't like the other, and then it switches and you get frustrated with both of them, but at different times. And it just it was the interplay between the two characters in that book was more interesting to me than the mystery. And that actually had a really strong mystery in that book. So I'm going to say Hawthorne and Horowitz. Okay. The best written book you've read this year. So for this one, I'm going to go for my favorite book and my best book. My favorite book, as I have said, is Mink River. This is a book that just touched my soul like no other book has. It's beautifully written. It's like poetry on the page. It's gorgeous. My best book of the year is The Postcard, because it tells a very personal story in a way that you feel pulled in to the story and not like you're watching it from the outside. It also tells the part where they tell the story of the parents and the siblings who died at Auschwitz is so interesting, because you'll be reading this and you'll be thinking, how does the person know this? And then she'll tell you how they know it. And I'm like, wow, I like you. You're smart. You realize, you know, that someone who reads a lot is going to pick out that doesn't make sense that you would know it. So you explain why. And you go through that you actually went through this process. And you don't do it in a telling sort of way. It just fell together so beautifully. The way that story comes together at the end. I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say it has one of the most satisfying endings that I have ever read. So I'm going to have to say The Postcard by Anne Berest. Okay. The book that you pushed most people to read in 2023. I'm going to cheat a little bit on this one because this is not actually a book I read in 2023. I read this book in 2022, maybe also in 2021. I can't remember. It was my favorite book of 2022. And a number of people read it saying that I recommended it to them. So it's The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which I loved, 5-star book from 2022. Unfortunately, a lot of people who read it and said that I recommended it to them didn't like it. So I feel kind of bad about that. This is not a book for everybody. It is a pandemic book in a very pandemic-y kind of way. So it's not like Tom Lake where the pandemic is just sort of there and then there's this other story. No, the pandemic is the story. So you have to be okay with that. And I can understand why people aren't ready to deal with that or aren't in a place where they can deal with that. It also deals with everything else that was going on during that period of time, which includes the riots around the murder of George Floyd, which happened in Minneapolis, which is where this book takes place, which was really hard. And I know people have different relationships to that incident and the fallout. And maybe you aren't ready to read that. It also has because of the way it was written very contemporaneously. So this takes place from All Saints Day 2019, so November 1st, 2019 to November 1st, 2020. And it was written during that time. So it's written very contemporaneously, which gives it kind of a different feel and a different pace. And I understand why that doesn't work for everybody. It worked for me because I like that sense of immediacy, but I can also see why it would feel disjointed to some people. It didn't to me, but that's fine. But I will say this one. Okay, so what book made you cry the most? I actually had two for this, and one of them was Wandering Souls. I didn't want to do that one twice. I wanted to spread the love. So this is the other book, and I don't know which one made me cry the most. I just remember that they both made me cry. And it's Everything Here is Beautiful by Mira T. Lee. This is a story of two Chinese American sisters. The younger of the sisters has a pretty significant mental health issue. The older sister tries to take care of her. It's a very heartbreaking book. I read it for my library book club. We had a great discussion for it. I do recommend this one, but it is sad. There's no way to get around it. This is a sad book. Okay, what book made you laugh the most? That would be You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. So they're sisters. Amber Ruffin is a writer, and I guess she has her own show too, but she's a writer on the Seth Meyers show. They are from Nebraska. Amber Ruffin now lives in New York, but Lacey, her sister, still lives in Nebraska. And these are just stories of like racism that Lacey deals with every single day. And I feel kind of bad saying that it made me laugh the most. I wasn't laughing because the incidences were funny. I was laughing at the comedy that the sisters put into it. And I was kind of, at some point you just have to laugh. It's like laugh or cry at a couple of them. And it is. A lot of it is the nature that the sisters brought to the book. Now there's a follow-up book called The World Record Book of Racist Stories. Also very good. I think the best stories are in We'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey, but I think they're both worth reading. I listened to both. That's a great way of doing it. Okay. A new favorite author you discovered this year. Well, it's a new to me author because I've never read this guy, and now I just want to read everything he's written. Truman Capote. So I read In Cold Blood. Fantastic book. I really enjoyed it, and that's not the kind of book I like, but more than the content of the book and what he did with the book, it was the writing that pulled me into it. And I just knew I needed to read more of his. So I ordered a bunch of his books. One of the books I ordered, and I showed it every week for a month, was this collection of 3 stories. 2 were Christmas stories, 1 was a Thanksgiving story. So I did read that this past year. Loved it. It's on my shelf. It will come out every year, because it will. But I have a bunch of his other books that I'm looking forward to reading because his writing just really spoke to me. And yes, I know he's not a new author. He's been around for a while. In fact, he's dead, but he's new to me. So that's what I'm going to say. And the final question is, what is the best nonfiction book you read this year? I was going to do In Cold Blood, but then I remember there's one I actually liked even better. Mortal Monarchs, 1,000 Years of Royal Deaths by Dr. Susie Edge. I discovered Susie Edge on TikTok. She has a very active TikTok. She is a medical doctor, but then she left medical practice, went back to school to get a degree in history, and now she talks about historical medical stuff. And this just goes from William the Conqueror. Does it even start with William the Conqueror? Let me make sure. No, it doesn't. It actually starts with Harold Godwinson, who was before William the Conqueror, and goes, the original publication of this book went through George VI. This being a paperback is not the original publication. It has an added chapter for Elizabeth II, and it just goes through each one. She has a lot of humor, but she tells you medically how they died, if we know, or what they might have died from. And I was just fascinated. And she's very approachable. So I have a degree in history. I have a degree in British history. I personally didn't learn anything historical from this book because I have a degree in it. But I learned a lot of medical stuff from this book. But I do think that if you are someone who doesn't know, who wants to know more about history, this is a really good one to go to because it is so approachable, so entertaining, and puts things in a great context. So, and I believe this book is now available in the United States. When I got this, it was not available in the United States. I had to get it from Blackwell's. So Mortal Monarchs by Susie Edge. So that's my second 2023 wrap up. It was a great reading year, and I hope that 2024 is going to be even better. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, and thank you very much for watching me this past year, and actually 14 months, because I've been on BookTube for 14 months now. It's been great. I really love all your comments and all your support, and I love getting to know a lot of my fellow booktubers. So thank you very much. Please like, subscribe. Feel free to join my Discord. Information's down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.